Earlier this year there was a lot of talk and speculation as well as memes about Max Verstappen potentially copping a race ban because he'd accumulated too many licence points. I guess it was all blown up in the way it was because he's the world champion. In the last 10 years or so, Formula 1 introduced licence points, similar to what you have on your driving licence for public roads. At least you do here, and I think there are other countries that have a similar system. Much like the UK road licences, you're allowed to accumulate 12 points before you're handed a ban, but after a certain amount of time, they will come off. In Formula 1 they come off after 12 months, in Britain, 3 years. And most people end up with 3 points for speeding. That is, unless you do what I did and give up 2 hours of your life and 80 of your hard-earned pounds to sit in a classroom and be told that speeding is bad. Do it in the West Midlands and it's £99. If you go literally a mile over there, over the border into Staffordshire, and do it at Chasewater, it's 80 quid. Like and follow for more big brain moments. Or you could just not get caught speeding. That's free. I haven't thought this one through, have I? But this was all part of a bigger movement by the FIA. A couple of years later, you would have to accumulate a number of points just to be able to get a super license in the first place, and that's been causing controversy, sort of, in the last couple of years. Kimi Antonelli being told he can have one, but Colton Herta being told that he can't. The difference being that Antonelli was going to get points for his license anyway, and allowing him to have a license at 17 was just in case something happened and Mercedes wanted to put him in early. Colton, on the other hand, usually ends up in a tyre wall. The Herta to Andretti stuff has gone a bit quiet now, hasn't it? Currently, these are the standings for licence points. Verstappen leads the way, although it's for all the wrong reasons, with 9. Behrman has got 8, which is brilliant going for somebody so early in his career, while Lawson and Piastri have got 6. Tsunoda's got 5, Norris 3, Colapinto 3, Hulk, Albon, Sainz, Gasly and Antonelli with 2, and Russell and Leclerc on just 1. Everybody else is on 0, or they've all been wiped off. Bottas has still got 5, and he's not even racing. Now you might be wondering, why are you talking about that? Because the video title says something else, and that's fine, I'm getting there. This is the setting the scene portion of the video. Background, I like to call it. It's a story, this is story time, there's a prelude and everything else. It would be like watching Return of the Jedi and skipping straight to the Death Star attack and going, hang on, who's that man with the melted face? The reason the FIA did all of this is because there was this worry that the emergence of drivers like Verstappen and Stroll, who entered F1 so young and with little experience, would cause other teams to try and find their own teenagers with potential. Yeah, alright, Max had way more potential than Lance, that's obvious, but we'd be in a situation similar to the end of the 1994 season, where the teams were hiring literally anybody who would pay. Because teams like Lotus and LaRousse were so desperate for cash to survive, they took those who could pay more than they could drive. And they were thinking that they were going to have teenagers who couldn't really drive, but they were just hoping that something would stick. But the reason that drivers started getting penalty points on their licenses was all because of the 2012 Belgian Grand Prix. The 2012 Formula 1 World Championship. What a season. 7 different winners in 7 different races. It hadn't happened before, and it hasn't happened since. I think the previous record to that was 5, but in total 8 drivers won a race in 2012. Button, Alonso, Hamilton, Webber, Vettel, Raikkonen, Rosberg, and Lord Maldonado. But he's a meme! I know, he still won a race. On merit. Unless you're one of those conspiracy theorists on the internet that believes that Williams got some special tyres from Pirelli for that race as part of some weird lottery. 4 drivers from 3 teams also led the standings at some point in the early part of the season. Button left after the first race because, well, it's the first race, but Alonso took the lead in Malaysia. His lead was also brief because Hamilton became the points leader after the Chinese Grand Prix, and then Vettel became the points leader after Bahrain, where he led until Monaco when Alonso took back over. Hamilton's win in Canada put him top again, but after the European Grand Prix at Valencia, Alonso looked the odds-on favourite for the title. After the Hungarian Grand Prix, Alonso was 40 points in the lead. But Alonso had only won 3 races all season, that being in Malaysia, Valencia and Hockenheim. And it's actually interesting to note that when Alonso won the German Grand Prix, Vettel was sitting 3rd in the standings, 10 points behind Webber, and had finished that Grand Prix in 5th behind Kobayashi, who himself had finished a so-solid 21 seconds behind Alonso's Ferrari. And part of how Alonso had built such a big lead is because luck had gone his way a couple of times. At Valencia, he'd won while Hamilton was punted off by Maldonado, and Vettel had retired earlier on in that race. Hamilton had also retired from the German Grand Prix with Vettel 5th, as just mentioned, while Alonso was 5th at the Hungaroring, but he was just one position behind Vettel, so didn't lose out too much to him. So with a 40-point or so lead after Hungary and Belgium coming up, it seemed that things were finally going Ferrari's way. But there's a saying in English, and I don't think it translates very well into Spanish or Italian, but that phrase is, don't count your chickens before they've hatched. The Belgian Grand Prix of 2012 was the first race after a 5-week summer break. It makes this 3-week summer shutdown seem like a week off in comparison, and it was the 12th race of a 20-round season, which, again, you don't know how good you've got it these days. I say these days, this was 13 years ago, it seems like yesterday. But either way, while Alonso had a decent lead, the battle was raging for the runner-up position. Because while Alonso had that cushion, Webber and Vettel were equal on points, with Hamilton only 7 further back. Actually, I'll tell you how well I remember 2012, because that year, that summer, I was actually in Spain when the Spanish utterly t***ed the Italians in the Euros. And the conditions were all over the place for the first practice session. It absolutely hammered down with not many drivers setting a lap time. Charles Pic in the Borussia was fastest, of all people. But then in qualifying, Button took the bull by the horns to get his first pole position since 2009. While Maldonado took the fastest time in the first qualifying session, Button took the fastest time honours in the second and third sessions, finding nearly 2 seconds between the first and second session, and then an extra 10th in the top 10 shootout. In second place, with a brilliant showing, was Kamui Kobayashi. Maldonado was third, but would get a 3-place grid drop for impeding in the first session, which pushed Raikkonen, Perez and Alonso up 1 place. Webber was 7th, but got a penalty for a gearbox change, so he would start in 12th. So the remainder of the top 10 was Maldonado 6th, Hamilton 7th, Grosjean 8th, De Resta 9th, and then Vettel in 10th. Vettel didn't even make it into the top 10 shootout. He was 10th because Webber was penalised. Convenient. Alonso had gone for a straight line setup, so he would have been faster through sectors 1 and 3. Hamilton meanwhile prioritised downforce in the middle sector where it's a lot twistier, but either way, Hamilton missed out because he made a mistake at La Source. So for the start of the race, Alonso had the opportunity to maybe clear a couple of the drivers ahead of him. He had a slippery car, so he could have had Perez and or Raikkonen on the Kemmel straight and keep them behind in the twisty bit in the middle sector, before using his speed to get a gap and maybe catch the other Sauber of Kobayashi towards the end of the lap. That's the theory, but the fact of the matter is, he didn't even get past the first corner. At the start, Maldonado's clutch slipped and the car started moving, doing one of the most blatant jump starts you'll ever see, which makes a nice change from what we saw at Hungary this year with Hülkenberg moving 0.997 of a millimetre and getting a penalty for it. Maldonado went from 7th to about 3rd as a result. Alonso also got a fantastic start, although his was legal, and he was in about 4th going into turn 1, ahead of the 2 Saubers and behind Maldonado, Raikkonen and Button. But behind, it was about to kick off. Obviously I can't use footage, so I will just use my best descriptive language. Or Microsoft Paint. Either or. Grosjean actually got a very good start, and was able to get most of his car in front of Hamilton. But he had one of those Sebastian Vettel moments where he thought he was past the car in front, but just because your seat is in front of the car that you're racing, doesn't mean that your whole car has passed the other car. Grosjean drifted to the right, assuming to take the inside for La Source, but ended up clipping Hamilton's left front. Hamilton meanwhile got onto the grass, fishtailed, and then hit the back of Grosjean, so he got lifted up onto the rear crash structure. And because Hamilton couldn't brake, he effectively ended up pushing Grosjean towards the cars going into the hairpin. The result was, well, this. And this picture doesn't really tell the full story. Grosjean was pushed into the back of Kobayashi and vaulted up over the back of the Sauber, before skimming across the front of Alonso's car and missing Fernando's head by, well, inches. It was that close. With the McLaren now freed from the back of the Lotus, Hamilton gave Alonso's car another smack which punted the Ferrari into Perez, and Alonso got air from going over the other Sauber, landing hard on the tarmac. Hamilton also went up and over Perez's front, with the McLaren, Ferrari, Lotus and Perez's Sauber wrecked in the runoff area. Maldonado was spun round but able to continue. Kobayashi meanwhile returned to the pits with a gaping hole in the side pod and the front and rear wing removed. Sauber managed to get the car repaired and he rejoined in last place. The safety car was called out, naturally, although if this had been 2025 it would have probably been a red flag, because Hungary 2021 was red flag for less. On the restart, Maldonado, likely fuming from being spun around at the start, hit Glock's Marussia and that took him out of the Grand Prix. so the penalty for jumping the start would be served at Monza instead. Jensen meanwhile took the restart and wasn't bothered for the rest of the race, with Vettel coming through the field to finish in second, 13 seconds behind him. It was a pretty dominant win for Button, although there's the what could have been for Fernando. A lot of people say that Fernando lost the title with this one incident at this one corner at this one race, but a lot of people tend to forget that there was also China, Bahrain and Japan that also need to be considered. In China, he qualified 9th and finished 9th. Vettel, who started in 11th, ended that race in 5th. In Bahrain, Alonso didn't set a time in the top 10 shootout and finished 7th, while Vettel won, with Alonso being nearly a minute behind Vettel come the end of that race. Ferrari had very little to no pace in those two races, and then in Japan, Alonso moved across the front of Raikkonen on the first lap and got a puncture that took him out of that race, after once again not having much pace in qualifying. Ferrari also bungled strategies at Canada and Silverstone that cost him wins as well. So it's not strictly this one moment that cost Fernando the title, much like Massa was hurt in his title fight in 2008 by more than just Singapore. Silverstone, Malaysia, Australia and Fuji were all factors. Red Bull had also fixed their alternator issues by this point, and Vettel went on to have quite a decent run come the end of the season with the improvements to the car, but as always you can debate about this in the comment section. After the race, Grosjean was handed a €50,000 fine and banned for a single race. The stewards and FIA noted that this wasn't just because of the fact that the incident wiped out two drivers who had a shot of winning the championship, but also, in the process, Alonso had almost had his head taken off. And it was also the culmination of several other silly incidents that Grosjean had caused in that season alone. Grosjean did have 3 podiums to his name by this point in his career, so he was capable of doing well. It was just that he had the tendency to completely lose his head in certain situations. He'd been involved in a total of 7 first lap collisions that year. One of them pretty large, admittedly, but for the FIA, it was the final straw. It meant that Grosjean was the first driver in 18 years to receive a race ban, the last being Michael Schumacher in 1994 for the black flag fiasco at Silverstone, and funnily enough, Schumacher was on the grid that day, celebrating his 300th Grand Prix. Eric Boullier, who was the boss of Lotus at that time, put it down to Grosjean trying too hard to do too well too soon, and the stewards and FIA partially agreed with that sentiment. Gary Connolly, who was one of the stewards that day, said that while Romain had a car capable of achieving good results and mixing with the established drivers on the grid such as Alonso, Button, Webber, Vettel and Hamilton, he still needed to exercise caution around those drivers. They had way more experience and were the known drivers on the grid, and the ones most likely to win the championship. Grosjean meanwhile was still a relatively new kid on the block and a little out of his league compared to those drivers. Grosjean was then the centre of controversy again at Suzuka due to pitching Mark Webber around at the first corner, the same place where Alonso moved over on Raikkonen and eliminated himself from the race. But in addition to that, there was also another thing that could have been a thing that lost Alonso the title. At that same race weekend, Jean-Eric Vergne was given a 3-place penalty for holding up Bruno Senna, while Vettel, who impeded Alonso, only got a reprimand. Something that Alonso said was surprising. It's also interesting going through all the comment sections because in this time period, the internet is a thing, and these articles have the comment sections open so you can really see what people were saying at the time. I find it interesting anyway. Speaking to the F1 website back in 2021 or so, Grosjean took full responsibility for what happened in that race. He said at the time that people often forget that despite him getting his first F1 races under his belt in 2009, 2012 was his first full season of Formula 1. But it's not to say that he was a complete weapon for the 2012 season, because in Spain he'd set the fastest lap on his way to 4th place and then finished 2nd in Canada, which was pretty good considering the drivers who were around him at that particular time. But, as he mentioned in that same piece, he said he was overdoing it, trying to keep up. He couldn't get out of that headspace of that he had to try and finish as high up as possible when 4th or 5th was the most realistic finishing position, and it often cost him. But Alonso wasn't too upset with things. Romain apologised immediately and Alonso told him that a ban was a step too far in his opinion, also telling Grosjean that he'd bounce back. Mark Webber on the other hand wasn't so cordial with Romain, calling him a first lap weirdo and also jumping straight onto Grosjean's back after being spun around in Suzuka. It also has to be said that after the incident at Spa, Grosjean didn't make the top 6 for the rest of the season. But he did bounce back in 2013 like Alonso predicted, with 6 podiums over the course of that year. So there is that, I guess. 2013 Grosjean was one hell of a redemption arc. What also needs saying is that away from the track he does seem like a good bloke. I streamed one of his esports events for him and got a quick interview during the proceedings. I can only apologise for having a creased shirt and bad camera angles because I had to quickly set that stream up at my in-laws' place because my neighbour in my old flat who lived downstairs knocked my phone line out. And there's also a great shot of him from 2018 comforting a mechanic after a botched pit stop. And he also had a conversation clearing the air with Lewis Hamilton over the anti-racism gestures during 2020, where some comments he made were taken out of context by people on social media. People on social media taking things out of context? Shocker. Oh, and he was also elected to be one of the directors of the Grand Prix Drivers Association in 2017, serving until the end of 2020 when George Russell took his place, and Romain in turn took over that role from Jenson Button. So despite his early career issues, if we can call them that, the rest of the drivers must have respected him enough to have him in that position. But I think I need to do a video on his full F1 career at some point. But in the December of 2012, the FIA did announce that they were considering bringing in a points-based penalty system that could be used to penalise those who were constantly becoming involved in silly accidents that they don't seem to learn from. The system that is in use now, really. Now people do make mistakes from time to time, it's all part of racing. But with Grosjean, a lot of people would have said that it was a pattern by this point. 7 first lap collisions in 12 races. That's way too many. It sounds a lot like my iRacing career, to be honest. If they have a Marlboro McLaren or a Red Bull livery, just let them through. They'll crash themselves out eventually. Hot lap merchants. Sorry, but that has brought up some stuff. So there are some takeaways here. Whether that crash is where Alonso lost the title or not, and I'm sure there will be the debates in the comment sections because there always is, and whether Grosjean is the reason that drivers have 12 penalty points on their licenses to play with. It does have to be said though that since the introduction of the licence penalty point system, Grosjean sits 8th on the all-time list. That is from a list that I have here that was published in November 2024. At the time, Verstappen sat top on 39 points, and still does because he's had some more points added since then, with Kevin Magnussen on second on 37 points. Perez is on 34, Vettel 32, Stroll 29, Kvyat 27, Alonso 26, and then Grosjean on 23. It's then Hulk on 22 and Ricciardo on 21. Interesting stuff. But it does seem that Grosjean sorted himself out a bit after this accident and the subsequent ban. His 2013 was a lot better by all accounts, but there were occasions that he did slip back into those old ways, as it were. But there were occasions of brilliance, such as his podium at Spa in 2015 when the Lotus team had bailiffs in the paddock ready to seize assets, and then going on to score points on Haas's debut in Australia. But the thing is, what if you had a time machine and you went back to 2012 and you sat at that first corner of that Belgian Grand Prix and looked at the guy next to you and said, "That's not even his biggest accident." That's a scary thought, isn't it? So then, a look at the 2012 Belgian Grand Prix, where Romain Grosjean caused a very scary pile-up at Turn 1, and this race could also be where the Halo discussions began. If this has been an interesting walk through the motorsport history books, then do give the video a like so I know I've done a good job, and for more stuff like this from the channel, get subscribed and also get that bell on so you never miss out on anything else that I do around here. Massive thanks as ever go out to the mad lads over at Patreon for the continued support, and if you want to support me at a more personal level, there's a link to Patreon in the description, along with links to Discord, socials, affiliates and any other bits and bobs you might want or need to know. Or there's super thanks for the one and done styles of donations and memberships so you can Patreon without the Patreon. So until next time, I've been Aidan, have a great day wherever you are, and goodbye.